Well, good afternoon, everyone from Brazil. This is the fourth panel of presentations of the International Symposium, Highrise, which has as its topic of discussion, reading the vertical city, cartographies, narratives, and infographics. Today we have 5 presentations. Loic Bonneval is the first, and he will present 2 works. First, your own work, a little known urban form, the large luxury housing estates Lyon, France. After, he will present Bianca Botea and Olivia Leguip's work, anthropological approaches to high-rise living, case studies in Ducaire, Lyon, France, and Brasov, Romania. After him, Marcel Fantin, professor at the IAU-USP, will follow with the work in identifying verticalization processes, the use of urban remote and socioeconomic indexes. Manoel Rodrigues Alves, the coordinator of the Highrise project from Brazil, will discuss the infographics, urban narratives, and social spatial cartographies. And finally, we will have the presentation of Luciano Costa, professor at the IAU-USP, entitled Verticalization, Photographic Explorations of the Complex Urban Phenomena. The panel will be moderated by me, Camila Camargo, researcher at the IAU-USP, and which presentation will take 15 to 20 minutes, and I will advise you of the time if necessary. After the presentations, we will have a moment of discussion. So we ask people who follow us on YouTube to register their questions or comments on chat. We will get everything back later. Before the presentations, Professor Manoel will make a faster speech about the high-rise timeline and the forms of contribution. Manoel, please. You are mute.
Yeah, okay. Sorry. Hello, everybody. Please, can you share my screen? And okay, let's see here. First of all, I want to, in the name of Professor Christian Montes, present his excuses because he had a personal familiar problem and he will not be able to be with us today. Very quickly, I want to restate what we asked you, your collaboration since the first day. That's the building of this collaborative timeline that you see in the background of the slides. And here you have the instructions, or for those who were not with us last week. I mean, this is a timeline about verticalization process in São Paulo that we are building, and we are asking for the collaboration of everybody in the sense of adding their comments, to register their observations, and as you see, there is a middle platform that's where you'll be able to add your comments and so on. Either that or also these. You can, by the QR code, you can scan the QR code and you get access to this collaborative timeline. We hope you like it, and we expect your contributions in order to develop. That's it for the time. Thank you very much. Camila?
Okay, thanks, Manuel. We can start now. Loic, please.
Thank you, and hello, everybody. So,
okay, welcome.
I start. So the large luxury housing estates built in the 70s in France are a rarely studied urban form. They differ from other large housing estates in their mode of production in the unassisted private sector, and therefore aimed at wealthy clientele, and they also differ in their location and their inclusion in development projects. Many of them are built in a diffuse manner, in gaps in the urban fabric, with which they present a clear break. They can also anticipate gentrification processes without triggering their dynamics because of their position as an urban block or even as a city within the city, cut off from the surrounding districts. So our goal was to study how they are seen by their inhabitants, what were the narratives and the processes of value formation, or rather the registers of valorization of verticality in the urban space on the basis of 2 case studies in the city of Lyon. 3 forms of valorization appear: singularization, the conciliation of inhabitant constraints, and the effects of internal and external social classification. The first case study was Îlot Moderne, composed of 2 contiguous towers of 16 and 17 stories with 330 dwellings and about 1,000 inhabitants. L'Îlot Moderne is located in the northeast of Lyon's 7th district, built in the early 70s and close to the Pardieu business district. This residence embodies for its promoters the development of a new centrality in Lyon. It was located in an area that is still not very densely populated, mainly made up of factories, apartment buildings, and small pavilions. And by its age, its innovative architecture, and its morphology, it crystallizes a form of urban renewal. It stands out clearly from the surrounding dwellings and reveals a strong singularity in the scale of the district and the city. It is reputed to be of a high standards, but it also differs from the surrounding houses in terms of the infrastructures that it has at its disposal and that its occupants benefit from. A rooftop swimming pool offers a rare panoramic view of the city. There is also a private parking space, a playground, and a tennis court. At the foot of the building, small buildings delivered with the residents group together various shops, a pharmacy, bank, bakery. And among the oldest owners, the precursors of the gentrification of the neighborhood, there are several private doctors and specialists working in the neighboring hospitals. The second case study was Les Balcons de Lyon. Balcons de Lyon co-ownership is located in the 5th district at the top of a hill overlooking the Vieux-Lyon district, which is the city's historic center. And this residential complex comprises about 200 housing units and about 500 inhabitants spread over 9 contiguous buildings, including 5 towers rising between 7 and 13 stories, connected by 4 horizontal bars. It is completely fenced off and can only be entered by 1 lane. On the first level, accessible to visitors, wide esplanades decorated with plant pots and plant terrace offer a privileged panoramic view of the city. Below, residents can access a vast private park with lawns, a tree-lined driveway, play areas, a swimming pool, a clubhouse, and a tennis court. So the data that feed our research comes from an interview survey. The objective was to study the practical, subjective, and symbolic relationships that the different generations of inhabitants have with their living space. During the interview, several themes related to the way of living and investing in the residence, neighborhood sociability, as well as the representations, forms of attachment and enhancement associated with housing in the neighborhood were addressed. And in order to be able to explain the representations through social trajectories, the respondents were also led to develop a certain number of biographical aspects, their residential trajectory, giving meaning to the practices and representations observed in the present. And during each interview, we wanted to gather as much information as possible to study the discourse and practices of the interviewees in order to articulate their sociological profiles, their trajectory, and the particular configurations engaged by their residential context of registration, verticality, morphology, and history of residence. And to constitute our sample, we gave preference to people who own their apartments and have lived in the residence for at least a few years, and in some cases, since the construction. And in addition, we completed our survey with additional interviews with other people involved in the life of the residences. Postman, building employee, developers, professionals working in the residence. So this brought certain elements of knowledge about the residences of the inhabitants interviewed were not necessarily aware. The study of the two residencies has shown the importance of three valorization processes carried by the experiences and practices of the inhabitants, which take several forms. The first valorization process is one of singularization, and the tall buildings are relatively rare in the urban landscape of Lyon, and they stand out and mark the landscape. Several interviewees mentioned the fact that their building is known through the district or even through the city, and that it can be used as a landmark or that it arouses a certain curiosity because of its height, but also for other characteristics, for instance, the swimming pool. This is truer for the Îlot Moderne than for the Balcon de Lyon, part of which is less visible from the streets, but the fact remains that these buildings are high-rise buildings, or at least singular places in the district, and more broadly in the center of Lyon. It is in the process of singularization and the privileged relationship with the city carried by the inhabitants that the valorization is built. And for instance, words of an inhabitant, you can see the whole city. It's incredible. We are completely out of time. We are out of scale. We are out of everything. It's like being in an ivory tower. It's surprising. And the idea of an internal consistency expressed in terms of the village within the city comes a little further in the interview. And he says, in fact, it's representative of the population. How many people are in there? There are 1,000 of us. It's enormous. It's a village. The second valorization process was about intimacy and nature in the city. And verticality also makes it possible to overcome constraints or nuisance inherent in city life. To a certain extent, this gives a concrete expression to the project of Le Corbusier, for whom height, more than a dimension to be valued as such, was a solution to the double requirement of density and space. By building higher, one had to free up space for green spaces and provide the city advantages that it lacked. In fact, in the buildings which we studied, the configuration also appears to be a solution, a way of resolving contradictions between the wishes for housing, tranquility, space, even in relation to nature, and a sometimes intrusive urban character. However, it is not so much the space available at the foot of the building which attracts attention, but rather the fact that it is set back from the city, that it creates a distance from the most immediate nuisance. The absence of neighbors and the unobstructed view are signs of habitat which is preserved from most hostile aspects of city life. But very often, these characteristics did not become apparent to the inhabitants until they overcame their reticence about the shape of the large building. The idea of different rhythm of life, of places which, like the swimming pool, function as spaces of secondary importance, or even the fact of combining the proximity of urban amenities with the possibility of retreating from congestion, all contribute greatly to this feeling. So this protection of privacy against the intrusion of urban life that verticality favors is linked to the exclusive and distinctive character of this large luxury complexes. The singularization is characterized both by a distinction on the outside of the building and by a social classification on the inside. From the outside, these buildings are distinguished both by their standing in neighborhoods where they preceded the dynamics of gentrification by several years, and even 2 decades, and by their morphology, which impresses just as much as it intrigues. The solicitation by estate agencies wishing to have properties for sale in the building and relaying a strong demand for these residencies is experienced by the inhabitants as a signal of appreciation. Many of those surveyed report admiring reactions from their guests when they discover the view or the rooftop swimming pool. And very often, this is the family history that is at stake behind the relationship to the value and for instance, to the view. For instance, a 74 years old inhabitant who inherited the flat from her parents in the Balcon de Lyon associate age with social status, and she used a term that was only half ironic. She said, "Every day I say, I'm lucky to be here, but I say it, but I can't bear to be told, luck has helped you, I swear. And if we are here, we're worth it. That's it." And she saw the continuity of a project of social ascension experienced by her father, who, without a diploma, rose to the status of manager in a big company. And if the relationship with the outside is marked by this separation, the internal valuation of the building is rather characterized by a form of hierarchy. The shape of the buildings itself structures this social ranking by installing the most spacious, most attractive, and therefore most expensive flats on the highest, most highly valued floors. Flats above the 7th floor, and therefore the roofline of the neighborhood, are particularly popular, and those on the 16th floor benefit from a terrace. The layout of the flat allows some residents to carry out all or part of their residential itinerary in the buildings, improving their housing conditions with each move. And this vertical hierarchy can be seen in the ranking games played by the residents, which, also formulated at the second level, appear to be quite meaningful. And for instance, let's say an inhabitant in the 5th floor. Afterwards, there are jokes in the lift. We are the plebeians, and upstairs, it's the social lift. I like to joke about it, and then there are some people on the 16th who also like it. It's funny. It's the holy grail. And in conclusion, the register of singularization and its subdivision, reconciliation of constraints and distinction, constitutes the framework on which the processes of verticality enhancement by the inhabitants of large luxury housing estates are built. They are linked to the context of French cities where high-rise housing remains rare in the old centers and where verticality has been disqualified by the impoverishment of large housing estates on the outskirts. So it is the rarity and the atypical character of the high-rise housing estate that gives structure to the expression of value. And if these registers are not the high-rise, if these registers are not totally distinct from those employed by the actors of the urban factory, architects or developers who praise the uniqueness of their operation, they are not reduced to a standardized design of real estate advertisements or commercial arguments, but they rather bear witness to the appropriation of way of investing time and inhabited space. And so from this point of view, the forms of valorization can also contribute to the characterization of way of inhabiting the verticality. Thank you very much. And I go on with the presentation of Bianca and Olivia. Yes. Okay. Which we have some similarities. Just a little moment. For an ecology in AIDS, and this presentation will first address the theoretical frame, then the case studies presentation, methodology, and analysis results, politics of verticality and affordance of high-rise, to live in or to inhabit space-time of high-rise, the view from above, a spatio-temporal approach. So, the various works on verticality have led to observe the equivocal quality of high-rise living, either stigmatization or valuation, either a living characterized by a social distance in the neighborhood, or on the contrary, close relations. So, in view of this disparity in the aspects that characterize high-rise living, we can ask ourselves about the nature of this agentivity that qualify this high-rise living.
Loic, I'm sorry, we have your slides in the screen.
I'm
you
sorry?
need to share the Bianca's
Oh,
slide.
okay. Sorry. Okay, it's okay?
It's okay now.
It's okay, right. I'm sorry, I was there for the theoretical frame. So the question was about the nature of this agentivity that qualify this high-rise living in a specific way. In other words, about the actors and the actants, material and immaterial, about their relations or arrangements that produce this specific way of living and its value. So we proposed an ecological perspective inspired, among others, by Tim Ingold and Isaac Joseph. According to this approach, the quality of high-rise living is not given primarily by the physical qualities of the environment, nor by social relations or symbolic dimensions, but by an environmental configuration, material, historical, social, and so on, produced and experienced in a situation which gives meaning to the verticality. It also invites us to look at a tower, a bar, in a broader way than a reference object in itself, by integrating it into the environment that gives it existence. This perspective seems to us to be well summed up by a sentence of Merleau-Ponty, taken up again in the words of Isaac Joseph, highlighting the interest of ecological perspective of the city. To see the house is to access not only an object, but the world in which it is observable and accessible. The house is not the house seen from nowhere, but the house seen from all sides. So in concrete terms, the ecological approach to high-rise living that is proposed leads to situate these buildings in environment in movement, constructed and defined by the practices of designers and users. And we take into account the materiality of the spaces, the atmosphere, the life history of the people of the neighborhood, the policy of verticality, and so on. The methodology consisted in observation, participant observation, and interviews, and also in a method of commented itineraries with recordings of the sound ambiances and onboard videos taken by our interlocutors with a body-mounted camera. And like an approach in which the researcher captures and frames their reality, this methodology invites to go beyond the posture of authority. So there was 2 case studies, La Duchère in Lyon and the district of the Civic Center in the city of Brasov, Romania. Both have in common a major urban renewal context marked by major demolitions and restructuring. And the hypothesis was that these transformations reveal and give a particular meaning to verticality, which becomes more salient. You can see the 2 neighborhoods, La Duchère in Lyon and the district of the Civic Center in the city of Brasov. And in the Duchère, two towers, a tower and a bar, the panoramic tower and the bar Les Érables. So the panoramic tower was built between 1969 and 1972. It is 26 stories high, about 100 flats, and most of the inhabitants are owners. They own their apartments. But in this neighborhood, in La Duchère, we find mostly social housing. There are some co-ownerships, some condominiums, but mostly social housing. And La Bar Les Érables was built in the 60s, 18 floors. It's an 18 floors bar, and some duplex flats on the 17th and 18th floors. These are big apartments in all this bar. It is divided into two parts: a condominium and a rental. I think it's social, also social housing. I'm not sure, but rental. It's a rental part. You can see some views from the tower. So from the tower, views on here. And now the district of the civic center in the city of Brasov in Romania. The area named the Civic Center District in Brasov has undergone very significant changes over the past 50 years. It was the target of a massive demolition project during the communist regime in the 80s in order to build here a civic center. A few high-rise buildings have appeared at that time, 12 to 14 floors, but the rest of the reconstruction program was not completed, and an empty space remained in place for a long time. Under the Ceausescu regime, high-rise housing not only has a social reason related to housing policy, and was not only a symbol of modernity, like in Western Europe, it was also a special instrument of control by regrouping in the smallest possible areas. And today, in this urban area, the landscape became very eclectic, and recently another high-rise building was built, a mall and an office building. The mall was not well received by all the inhabitants because it is supposed to destroy the view with the hills landscape. You can see as a construction period and the mall and the new buildings, the office building. So the results of the research, and putting the two case studies into perspective allows us first of all to understand the importance of the historical configuration and the political intention in which the high-rise housing construction projects are inscribed. This allows to understand the different affordances and uses of height depending on the period. In Brasov, during the communist era, these high-rise buildings and the boulevard in the civic center district was perfect for displaying large portraits of the dictator when his visits were organized in the city at the time of large public gatherings. And after the fall of communism, in the new market society, this facade of the high-rise building served as a good support for large advertising billboards. This advertising displays also have an economical function, giving some resources to the condominium, but created some conflicts in the neighborhood. So high-rise living has been looked at mainly from a spatial perspective. The temporal dimension has been less explored or explicitly explored in this work on verticality and through a thick description. We wished to adopt this perspective and at the one time to explore in greater depth elements that had been little explored in previous work, such as body memory in the relationship to high-rise living and the pragmatic dimension of sight. On the other side, we wanted to show that the spatio-temporal anchorage is diffuse and very extended in time and space through the long memory of the inhabitants of their families. And one example is the case of Daniel, who came from Algeria and lives in La Duchère. Daniel arrived in La Duchère from Algeria with her parents, and as a teenager at the time, discovered France from a high floor on one of the mill bars in the large La Duchère complex, a bar that has since been destroyed. Since her arrival, she has always lived in La Duchère. Through the interviews with her, we were able to understand how her relationship to the view and to aid is conditioned by her Algerian and French residential trajectory. As an adult, Daniel married Pierre and they bought a flat in Les Érables. Many residents of Les Érables mention as a major disadvantage of their living room balconies facing Lyon their exposure to the wind and the resulting problems of isolation due to the heat in summer. However, Daniel's story leads her to take opposite position to her neighbors. She refuses to install double glazing and likes to feel the warm wind blowing into her living room day and night, whether the shutters are open or closed. In fact, she says that she feels sensation from her childhood and perceives again the warm wind that used to blow in the courtyard of the house where she lived in Algeria. The experience of hate is part of a historical depth that takes Daniel back to before her arrival in La Duchère, when she did not live on a high floor. This feeling of hate goes back to the starting point of her residential trajectory on her weekends of body memory through the sensation of the warm wind. And so the conclusion is that verticality is not simply a context in the sense of historical, material, political, some datum on which discourses are put, discourses that would give social or symbolic meaning to verticality. Verticality is rather an environment in the sense of Ingold's. And then we have to look at the environmental and urban configurations, material and immaterial, which characterizes high-rise living from an ecological perspective. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Okay, Loic, thank you. We don't have comments yet, so let's go on with the presentations. I would like to call Professor Marcel Fantin, please. Marcel, you are muted. Okay.
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 Let's go.
Let's go.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Camila. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to participate in this project, especially to Professor Manoel Rodrigues Alves and Professor Christian Montes. With the start of the project, Abyss was present to our team, identify study areas and buildings for research. How to find study areas and buildings for research in the immensity of high rises that São Paulo represents. What criteria we can adopt? I will show 1 minute. Share. And that's questions, how to find, how to select study areas and buildings to our research. Well, this presentation brings the methodological process adopted to selection of study areas in the city of São Paulo for development of project Highrise. The selection made by the method consists of the first stage of research, 2018, on the local and intra-urban scales. This method has been complemented and improved by other studies in this segment. This methodology supports the research of transformations in urban morphology due to characteristics, singularities, and meanings of the verticalization process. The sampling is a large and varied. São Paulo is that question. In GIS selection methodologies, the solution to find like a radar the areas in the buildings to investigation. The high-rise research involves the selection of buildings to be analyzed as case studies in the city of São Paulo and Lyon. In the French scope, the selection of the buildings was facilitated by the small sampling of vertical buildings existing in the city. So it was possible to more easily identify the buildings of interest to research, a comparative research. However, because of the dimension of São Paulo city and its intense verticalization, it's harder to indicate buildings of interest, since the sample is large and varied. A building cluster selection methodology was necessary for São Paulo and was performed by the Highrise team in Brazil. Well, to carry out the selection, the polygon of human development units of Municipal Human Development Index database were used for the research, available by Atlas Brazil. As well, the database of buildings constructed between 1805 to 2013. The spatial analysis was performed using QGIS software of GIS and the Google Earth to get high resolution images for identify the buildings. Well, the results stratified the São Paulo territory into 4 different human development index ranges. It was possible to stratify the territory. It's a range of socioeconomic sectors like that, with different realities considering income, longevity, and education. Here you can see the map, the results of the range, the division, and the distribution of the bands of index in the territory. Well, then we was made application of a filter. Okay, the next step was the application of a filter to buildings database. In order to use only the projects that are 50 meters high or 10 or more floors. Buildings considered high-rise.
Marcel, I'm sorry. I don't know if you change your slide. We have slide number 2 in the screen.
And now?
No.
No?
No, don't change. Now, yes. We have the slide number 5.
Okay.
Number 5.
Okay, now, Camila?
We have your slide number 5.
Yeah, number 6 now.
Number 6 now, yes.
Okay, I will show again. This is the result of stratification, considering Human Development Index. That's it. And now we used that to application of a filter to filter and classify the high-rise. And to high-rise, to select the high-rises, was considered the only projects that are 50 meters high or with them more floors. Building considered high-rise by the research. The buildings were overlapping on the polygons or with the index. And it was possible to calculate the density of buildings and each human development units. Then it was established a relationship between the accumulation of buildings for each polygon and considering the period of the research 1885 and to 2013. So the database were filtered again. The new selector filter brings information about the buildings, including number of floors, units, year of launch, price per square meters, and the responsible developers. Based on this information, the criterion of greater number of buildings in the interior of each unit of the index polygon was used to select the representative buildings from each index range. And now it was possible to make a characterization of study areas and select 10 study areas considering social index. With the cluster of selected buildings, it was possible to start the work of characterization of the study areas. For this characterization, 4 main axes were considered: mobility, demography, infrastructure, and regulation and verticalization. The methodology allowed to select representative areas that presented the most intensive verticalization in São Paulo city. The option for human development units, this polygon as a morphological unit, ensure the choice of areas with socio-economic characteristics that represent the diversity and inequality present in São Paulo territory. That's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, Marcel, thanks. In continuity, Professor Manoel Rodrigues Alves will now present the work Infographics, Urban Narratives, and Social Spatial Cartographies. Please, Manoel, you are muted.
Okay. Let me just check here. Okay. Thank you very much, Camila. Hello, everybody. Again, thanks for being with us. In fact, what I will be presenting now is almost the final a piece of the final fieldwork, the final stage of our research in terms of reading the urban territory of São Paulo, based in some case studies. But before that, the first thing I want to do, in the name of all my colleagues from Brazil, mainly from Brazil, only them, is to thank these guys, Ricardo, Silvia, Giovanna, Sara, Mateus, Jane, and Laura, and some others that are not here on the screen, like Luciano, Hélène, and Vanessa, for instance, because without their support, without their help. These are students that have been working very hard in the project. We will not be here. What we will be presenting to you would not have been possible without their collaboration. So in the name of everybody, that's the first thing I want to do. Thank you, guys. Talk to you later. Well, about before talking specifically about what I want to present to you today, I want to go back a little bit because I know that many of you were not able to be with us in the other sessions, you know, mainly last week, where on Tuesday morning we present all the methodology that was partially represented again by Professor Marcel Fantin. But very briefly, for those who were not able to attend previous sessions, this is a project that the data modeling, what Marcel was referring to, in fact, it encompasses 5 scales of analysis. Since the continental one, in terms of Latin America or Europe, until the one that I will be working today, the 5th scale, the scale of the real estate environment. You know, already in the micro scale of the intra-urban multi-scalar research developed. Just for you to have an idea of the complexity and all the scales that were involved in the research project in relation to São Paulo. Not only because these scales were also true for the work that my colleagues did in Lyon. So the problem that we had, for instance, when you look at this image, it's an image of the city of São Paulo, the limits of the city of São Paulo. And what you see in yellow, or this yellowish spot, is the number of high-rise buildings that we studied. And in our database, since 1985, you know, up to 2019, we have more than 13,000 high-rise buildings, the ones that were referred to by Marcel. Also, in other words, residential buildings that have more than 10 floors or are higher than 30 meters. All these was georeferenced, as Marcel explained it, but based also in what we call, we needed a universal index, and then we adopt HDI, the 3 parameters of HDI, you know, life expectancy, income, and schooling. But also, in relation to São Paulo, we developed the methodology based on the analysis of territorial units, you know, and we used the HDUs, you know, the morphology units defined by the municipality, and we did a lot of work. What you see in this image is the superimposition of the city of São Paulo, the high-rise buildings from 1985 to 2019, and some of the elements of urban legislation. So this was the kind of analysis that we did, and we got to a point that, for instance, what Marcel presented was the first stage of this, of reading the territory. I will not have the time to go through all the process again, you know, after that stage, where we get, but I'm just jumping and getting to the final one, where after a lot of work and many stages of development, we overlaid, we superimposed a statistical grid of analysis, 400 by 400, on this, what you see in gray here are the definitions or the polygons of the HDUs, the morphological units of analysis that will be divided in territory of the city. And then to that, we superimposed this statistical grid just to be more precise about what we called a verticality index for those who have more interest to see and to get in touch with this methodology, I suggest to you that you watch the session of last Tuesday, April 6th, Tuesday morning, right? And there you have the development of all that, but that's just an image that shows you a zoom. So what you see, the intensity of from the yellow, the light yellow to the dark orange, of course, the darker the color, the higher the verticality index. In other words, the higher the number of high-rise buildings that we had, because we needed a unit of analysis with the same dimensions. But okay, let's forget about it. That was just an introduction to point out that some offsprings, some results that are consequence of that methodology, that are associated to that methodology of reading. I'm not sure, I don't like the word methodology. I mean, I think they are more like a set of procedures of reading the urban territory, but that during the development of the research, it allowed us to investigate other things. For instance, the verticality index, the high-rise, residential high-rise buildings, to what extent they were associated to urban narratives and, for instance, to some public policies. I will mention only one, and this is the one. I mean, for instance, we also cross-referenced all that you see here, the polygons, the UDH, and also the small squares, 400 by 400. But we discovered some interesting facts when we associated this investigation in terms of the high-rise buildings related to the IDH 4 bands that we adopt, and the public policy of adopted squares, adopted public areas. That's another image of this. What you see, the small green circles are the adopted public areas, the adopted public squares. The colors in blue are related to the IDI range. And it's important to look at this, nothing new. I mean, we expected that. Of course, these would be a policy more representative of what? Of a more democratic city or a more private one? High rises new developments and the policies of the real estate developers are associated to what? And when we look at this pizza chart, we see it. 50% of these adopt squares, again, nothing new, where they are, in the more wealthy areas. So, because in fact, what we realized is that these became a policy of commercializing high standard high rises. Real estate developers were the ones who became to adopt public squares many times very close or just in front of a new development. And again, what it allowed us was when we worked together, the statistical grid of knowledge, but to identify processes of management and branchification of public spaces associated to new high-rises building, and also to identify correlations between new housing typologies, let's say ways of living, and temporary urban interventions and social spatial urban practices. Why temporary urban interventions? Because it's just like parklets. I mean, sometimes the real estate developer adopt a parklet or implement a parklet when the construction is finished. Okay, I don't have interest anymore. But more important, and going to infographics. So you had these, the image that you had, and again another image here where you have some of the urbanizations and the more with the higher verticality index the statistical grid. That's why the colors, each color is relative to one of the HDI bands that we adopt. And to do that, for each of the last 80 of these areas, we developed these summary sheets of analysis and so on. But I want so some of the information was related to the number of high rises, the population growth or not, the GNP, the gross national product, how it evolves, how it's related to the unemployment rate, the median income. And we also, we had to make a distinction between towers in terms of high-rise buildings and high-rise developments. That's why you see this difference. You may have one development with 5, 6, 8 towers or only one. This is another example where you cross-reference these residential high-rises. We did it for periods of 5 years of analysis. And the colors here are relative to each one of the HDA bands. So it's very clear that there is a peak in some and not in the others. Some other factors that we analyze, the average number of housing and so on. We got that here. But these are some other kind of infographics that they seem to me to be more important. They show more things. So again, the colors are related to the HDI band, but you can see, for instance, here in some of them, well, in this period there is a very big increase in the number of real estate developments. Not necessarily, well, how many towers? You have 4 new developments, but you have 7 towers, and then you go crossing this. Then you have, for instance, 3 towers for one development, and then also you analyze the average median, the average of number of units, number of floors. But these are the ones that I think are really interesting. This is relative to one of the squares. So the number you see, ID, it's an identification number, 7406, is the number of one of those squares, right? What you see here, what it shows to us is that, it was an area, there's no verticalization process there. And then in a very specific period of time, it blows up, it explodes. You have a very significant increase, that's what we have been calling the three-dimensional infographics, and we did for, they are more than just these. They inform more than just the number of, or the average number of housing units, or the precise number of new high-rises. They are, these together with these ones, they inform, you are able to understand a little bit better on a long time what has really happened in a specific unit of analysis, right? But this is really what I want to get. And this was presented by 2 other researchers of the Highrise project, Maíra Daites and Milena Sartori, last Tuesday afternoon in panel 1. Some people say that we are seeing in São Paulo a reduction of the floor areas of the apartments. That's true. That we have a concentration of new residential high-rises and apartments in the central area of São Paulo or areas close to the central area, making possible to establish an argument. While they are very small, they are just below the limit of financing of affordable housing, so they are qualified as popular housing or social housing, or even market housing. That's something that we have in São Paulo, popular market housing, but they are not, because they refer to a very important change of the typology of the buildings. So what it means is that the selling price of square meter is extremely high, $3,000 to $3,500. That for Brazil is a lot. So, although they are smaller, the apartments are smaller, it doesn't mean that they are popular housing. So here I want to finish my brief presentation about infographics. I try to give you a picture of different possibilities that we studied. Going specifically to the object of study, and as Loic presented before, there is quite a difference. I mean, a work much more related to the ethnographical, with an ethnographical approach developed by anthropologists was designed and developed in Lyon, right? So we intended to do that with the pandemic. It was not possible. We intended to develop up to a certain level, not so broad as they did it in Lyon, but we were unable. But what we did, not completely, because we had planned 3 field works, and we did only one late January last year. We couldn't do the other 2 in June and October because of the pandemic. That after all this issue of reading the territory, going out from the city, from the UDHs to the statistical grid, and then in here, in one of these squares, we had to choose buildings to be studied. Well, okay, then what scales do you have? You have a scale of influence of 1,200 meters, 400 meters, and then the object itself of study. So these are the scales. Again, coincidentally, other 5 scales of analysis, not because of, it's not, they are the same 5 scales, but these are only for that. What's important to point out is that even in the macro level or in the micro level, like this one, when I'm referring to micro level, we had an incremental method of analysis, and coincidentally, we have 5 scales in each one of them. Then for each one of those, we studied it a lot. I mean, in terms of the volumetric mass, land occupation, mobility, density, building height, the presence of more than one UDH in each one. In other words, to have, it was important to us to choose areas where we had different profiles of people living. What it means here is that inside this square of 400 by 400, you have 3 IDA, HDI bands, right? Let me move on. So that you can see in the symposium page, this material is there, right? But just for you, this is one of the objects of study. We did the work for, we intend to do it for 16. We were able to do it only to 4. Well, and again here, in that scale, you know, the HDU 400 statistical grid, the 1200 radius, 400, and then the building itself, we developed what we call the mandala. You know, it's this diagram of, I mean, I'm not going through all these, the characterization of these readings, but it's related to social spatial practices, to the morphology and the landscape, mobility, elements of attraction, general data, and urban legislation. As I said before, it's an unfinished work. We planned to develop 3 field works. We did only 1. What you're going to see are the results of the only one. The image to the left, Luciano will take on in just a minute. It's just a work more related. It's related to his presentation, but I'm just leaving it here because it's important to point out. So for us, it's also, you know, a way of reading the territory in terms of its liminarities and its tensions. And these are the reading keys. I mean, considering verticalization, living in vertical, considering the vertical city, 3 major reading keys: seeing, verticalization, and living. And then to each one of them, some other criteria: social practices, temporalities, processes, again, temporalities, limits, and perceptions. We did that, for instance, to read or to analyze, the block morphology, but I would say in a different way, or considering more diverse elements, right? Reading the height, reading the use of the ground floor, reading the levels of domain, levels of public domain that each building present, the elevation and the free spaces. Again, having, for instance, a table, a chart, a card, just like this. This is one of the, also one of the final products, and you have some elements of reading this territory. The other thing was the elements of attraction, and based on what you see, the dotted lines here are the way what we derive, the flaner, let's say. It's not a flaner, but I'm not finding the proper word in English. The way that we walk in different periods of the same day and in different days of different kinds. Working days and holidays or weekends. So, and this kind of analysis and some pictures relate to that. And, but to get where? To get to a Zoom, what we were interested in, unfortunately, as we didn't have the opportunity to develop the other two field works, we didn't develop these. That, I mean, this is, I mean, to me, it's absolutely relevant to in terms of reading social spatial practices, and to what extent high-rise building are promoting conflict and tensions, or are implementing other ways of practicing the urban tissue. And this is related to conflict and tensions. Again, in that area, another Zoom, and to develop these kind of things, the dimensional extrusions. And here you see on Thursday and on Saturday, and you see how different it is in terms of conflict and tensions, if it's on a working day or on a weekend, right? And these are the final product, the final drawing, let's say. And I want to finish saying that this is also part of our reading. For us, inclusiveness is part of the reality. It's not an issue in São Paulo. We have it. We have the social spatial segregation. We have this kind of practices in these urban areas. And that's what we wanted also to map. And that's why we call it mapping. It's not exactly a cartography. It was not necessarily exactly a narrative. So we adopted the word mapping. And I'll finish here. And again, it's another image of a work that Luciano will be talking about, will be developing, will be presenting to you. For instance, like this one, each image is related to one of the areas of study. You see here our walk in the areas and what we just called quiet places. That's it. Thank you. Finish. Guys, I finished. Can you please
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Professor Manoel covered some aspects discussed in the past sessions, introduced and developed important elements of the Highrise project. And now we have Professor Luciano Costa, who will explore an important research axis that highlighted social spatial practices in the concept of the verticalization process. Before that, I would like to ask you, people on YouTube, to contribute to discussion through questions and comments on YouTube chat, okay? Luciano, please. You are mute. You are mute. Okay.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Camila. I'm very happy here are in Symposium highlight. Okay, and thank you, Manoel, and all highlight groups. Oh, and the moment, and I go talking about the use of photography in project Highrise. Okay, and I'm go read a presentation for all. But the Highrise project, when asking the questions about the relationship between verticalization, access to the city, and its spatial and social implications in São Paulo city, presents an analysis model that addresses this issue in contextual and the multi-scale way. Thus, the complexity of the urban phenomenon correspond to need for a diversified methodology which incorporates different strategies for reading and interpreting the territory of São Paulo, emphasizing its last 35 years. Therefore, the fifth axis of analysis is oriented by association between the verticalization process and the inclusivity notion. Understand five works that seek to identify social practices, produced and reconfigurate, taking the enterprise surroundings and specific areas along the paths. For this analysis, scale change, as we know, it was previously realized a division of the total area of São Paulo city into quadrants of 400 by 400 meters, in which four of them, with different socioeconomic and spatial compositions, were selected. In this image, we see. In these quadrants, the focus was the local residence scale and their interactions with the surrounding space, identified from situations, notions like seeing, living, and the verticalization itself as a dynamic that's capable of redefining social practices. For this purpose, the research group realized visits to four areas seeking to identify dynamics of verticalization, socialization, and public life in those quadrants, have an enterprise as a territorial landmark. Composing this territorial approach, photography participates initially as a recorder and descriptions of past and of the path and urban process mentioned. They present the paths taken by the group of research seeking to highlight the dynamics of public space. 1 minute, please. Camila, it's good, no problem. Um minuto. Alô? Que foi?
You
Hello?
need to share your screen. We don't see your images.
Oh, excuse me.
I'm sorry.
Oh my God. Okay, thank you. Excuse me. Oh my God. Okay. Excuse me.
If you need, you return your presentation. It's not a problem.
Okay. Thank you. Excuse me. Return the presentation. Okay. Oh, I'm return on the moment I go talking about the pets and colleges. Okay, the second part of a presentation. Okay. Well, a few before we were talking about the 4 quadrants. Okay, and we can see the different areas when turn around São Paulo and quadrantes selecionados. Okay, in pets and colleges we go thinking about the images, but the other way. One moment, please. Okay, the photographic materials produced mostly by this research and guided by the group's planning and actions had the initial purpose of constructing a solid visual reference of the chosen areas, so that there could be a spatial analysis, deepening and identifications of questions not considered before for this purpose. Two collective discussion workshops about image edition were carried out in order to create classification and inventories about the local urban dynamics. Okay, while it allowed global photographic recognition for other visual productions, which we will present soon. Okay. The present boards are originate from the workshop which highlight the pets and the special marks relevant to study. Okay. Thus, we can say that in this first part of production of urban visual narratives, photography plays a traditional role to its use in urbanistic and the architecture studies. It means as a tool for analysis and the reflections about research areas as concepts illustration are and a part of critical argument about urban phenomena. Rigo and Wright address these subjects. Photography has not simply been a document of accomplished works. It has been used in data entry process, conceptualization, site plan, and site assessment, insert into propaganda, disclosure, and the architectural manifests in architectural planning and education, and a creative tool in the design process. So, the images produced are the primary material, the result of a view that is objective and distant from the urban, that allows the deepening and local dynamics recognition. Also, as reinventions of what has already been seen, proximity of space materialism in connection to discussion proposed by project, so that punctual view obtained the field and expanded. The photographic representations will then be crossed by real elaborations done along the research. Okay, the first one is the collage that seek to understand local dynamics where only one image wouldn't be enough. As an example, this collage this with pictures taken in an upper-class neighborhood, Vila Andrade, and its border with Paraisópolis, or this one products with images from Penha neighborhood. Okay, excuse me. Penha neighborhood, okay? At last collage on the left, we can see a recently constructed enterprise and across the street. On the right, a popular housing estate. It's interesting to notice that despite being closed, the building's architectures don't interact with one another, and the street is like a borderline on that is spatial of class and of different city conceptions. We can say the collage itself corresponds to a juxtaposition observed as a fissure in the space, an impassable cut in which walls and the enterprise access controls define the condition very well. The further collages seek to understand other specific of the areas present in which parallelism, fragmentations, and the urban process sprawl are not possible to embrace with only on view. Okay? Next, we go into the series now known along the research as Red Series. The name is due to aesthetic strategies of intervention, indication, valuation present on the images, as we will soon observe. The first one shows 4 images, each one from a different neighborhood, and it seeks to handle the region's skyline, proposing kind of territorial cut from a residential building indicated by a double line. It's intended that a topographic line is recognized so that it's possible to identify a verticalization process along a course or spot evaluation that it can inclusively coincide with a ridge divided to values. Next, in these two other projects, we can observe different comparative strategies that indicate sites densely verticalized in the areas where the referential high-rise buildings are. This way, it's good to notice that they complement one another in a vertical framework that accentuates enterprise in the 4 areas and the other one horizontally organized indicate the dramatic verticalization process shown by the red dots. We should consider that these two last boards always seek to activate an analytic and comparative site, but they also look for a quality of visual experimentation and relative autonomy in relation to other forms of research representation. Where are our living restrictions due to pandemic. Here in Brazil, the social distancing measures began right after the first field trip and at the same time as we are planning a second one. That's why the research started using the images produced more intensively while looking for other forms of getting close to the territory too. We can precisely see another one of these experiments with the images. By using Street View, we did what we can call a virtual drift, exploring paths and the visual difference from those on site. We got to identify new frames and the possibilities to territory recognition as we virtually stressed the enterprise and established relations with different urban dynamics in different directions. República, Morumbi, Vila Prudente. Okay? In order to value space exploration dynamics, we choose to produce boards with various images to incite a comparisons among them, and also refer to photographic inventories produced by Becker couple. For example, in the series in Prudent Neighborhood, we can see the building frame in red in all the pictures, while in some of them we have narrow streets and the urbanity that was established decades ago. Okay, 1 minute, please. Here, tá? In other images, excuse me, in other images, we have a new spatial dynamic determined by busy avenue, which gets beside to Vila Prudente subway station. From different angles, the side framing through street views always pointing towards the business, showing different urban settings. It's interesting to notice that there is an immersion simulation of the body in the territory, which suggests the observer indirectly entail in space. Okay. All right. Finally, I present a project made in a medium-sized city of Minas Gerais, Poços de Caldas, where we see an intensive verticalization process, opening and transforming the city's central areas and its adjacent neighborhoods. The blank space in white or dark gray indicates this enterprise, and most of them were built in the last 5 years. The red lines mark elevations on the original site, so we can identify the mountains which surround the valley background, or the central region of this very welcome city. However, we have the exact erasure of the original landscapes by building that get to insistently interrupt the local visual and ambience. In conclusion, I present a set of projects that can be considered a form of spatial recognitions and re-elaboration out of photography. These are projects that surpass a representative and a very similar view and that incite urban process reflections. This way, the images conceptions can present themselves to research autonomously, or be an argument and a tool of analysis about urban process in course associated to other informations problematized by the Highrise project. Thank you very much. Thank you, Camila.
Okay. All right, in the end, Luciano.
Excuse me, I start a presentation.
It's not a problem. Manoel, Marcel, Loic, please. We have to open the camera, Loic and Marcel. We have no comments so far. No. So I'm going to ask a question, perhaps more specifically for Luciano and Manoel. You showed some strategies of the research and how the pandemic caused changes in the forms of investigation on social spatial practices related to the verticalization process from photography and cartography and infographics. It seems that this potentiate the discussion because it tensioned a determined look already constituted. Could you talk a little more about these changes of for the forms of the investigations, please?
Well, you want to start? I can go.
Yes.
Well, let's say, I wouldn't say that the pandemic was, I don't know, Loic may also add some comments in relation to the work developed in France or in Europe. But at least for us, I don't think that we reoriented our work, our research because of the pandemic. And also, I don't think we are able to be affirmative or about any possible change due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We are still in the middle of the turmoil. But anyway, that's something that has to be considered. And that's why we organized, the first round table, the day after tomorrow. The name of the round table is Living the Vertical City after the COVID-19 pandemic, anything new, ? Right? And there we will have three distinguished researchers debating it, but it's really a round table. Independently of that, for me, it seems quite clear that there will be, in a few years, let's say 3-4 years, we will start seeing the results of the effects of the pandemic. I really believe that there will be a change in the typology of the housing units. It may be because of verandas, it may be because of the circulation of air that will be maximized. We don't know. It's still too early, to be affirmative about these things. And also in relation to, for instance, to heat island in the urban environment, maybe there will be also some consequence for urban legislation, not only to the typology of the housing units. In cities like São Paulo and some others, where we find we really have the problem of heat island. That's not a problem, or it's not such a problem in Lyon, but it's a problem here and in many other Brazilian cities, right? And the last thing I want to comment about it, for instance, São Paulo has a lot of dense areas that are not verticalized. If you go to the northeast area of the city, or east area, or the northern area of the city mainly, but not only, we will find very dense areas that are not verticalized. So, but I really think that some changes will happen. This morning, in the previous conference, the Arroyo conference, we were talking a little bit about it also. I mean, what kind of development we will be able to see in the public space, for instance. In the beginning, it seemed that people would be, okay, it would be one more problem in the use of public spaces, and now it seems a little bit different. So let's see, Paula Barros is a researcher from Minas Gerais, and she studies exactly that, mental well-being and urban environment. Let's see what she has to say on Thursday morning. I don't know if I really answered your question, but it's kind of
have a teaser of tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay, Loic, Luciano, would you like to comment anything else?
Maybe just a few words about what happens in France. It is also said that many people want to leave the cities and to live in the countryside, work in co-working spaces in the countryside, and work from houses. But it's very soon to know if there will really be a big movement outside of the cities, and probably there is more people who want to live than some people who really are going to leave the big cities in Europe. What is observed by the professionals in the real estate sector is that in Lyon, apartments with a balcony or a terrace now remain very expensive, and there is a huge demand for this kind of dwellings. But and many people buy houses in the countryside, but we need some more time to see what will be the consequences of this pandemic.
Just one, may I add something? For instance, some of the images that we produced, that Luciano presented, the ones that, for instance, the one I ended my talk, the one we nominated, the quiet places. They are quiet places, not because of the pandemic. Please don't get the impression, because we did that field work late January last year. It was even before the pandemic. I know I'm not talking to Camila and to Luciano, I'm talking to all the other guys, because otherwise they could get that impression that maybe the public spaces are kind of abandoned, and we call them quiet places because of the pandemic, but it's not. It was before. So just this comment about the work.
Yeah, great. Luciano, do you have a talk? Any? You are mute. You are mute. Okay.
It's very good. It's very good, Manoel. Remember this quiet places, okay? Because it's very interesting. The places where you don't have public life, okay? But this place is a square and a little parks, and other place where the people can could together with other people, okay? But I'd like return this question to Camila to to talking about the photography in the moment in pandemic. Okay, it's because at present one interesting questions about enable it closer fireworks insertion of the body into space and the experiments with photographic language. Okay, and then on the end, one can understand the pandemic enable a new site at research territory using street view. Okay, from a new perspective. The continuous and infinite images of these platforms, because it's very interesting. You thinking about the street view as infinite images, okay, were cut out. We during the research cut out, okay, in form of the virtual in form of a virtual drift. However, these simulations of the act of a transverse in space, it's only a circumstantial device that does not replace in any way, okay, the presence of the body inserted in the city, okay, either as resident, passerby, or as a researcher, okay. In these questions, I present the duality, not duality between a virtual and the face-to-face, or in the person, in the life, in our routine, okay. Where the seductions of the virtual is a place as a substitute for a shared relationship with the city and its inhabitants, okay. In the case the research, there was no pandemic. We can say for sure that the water planet visits to the neighborhoods would bring new value informations, and the street view would continue to be complementary to, okay. And the street view, it's only tool in the project, okay, because this different tool, how using the photography is always complementary, but can open a new use the language to serve a research about the cities. Okay, thank you.
May I just a comment?
Yes, of course.
Two brief comments about. It's important to understand that, I mean, it was not just exploration on photography, you know, but in fact, how to design other possibilities of reading the territory by other means. The use of the imaging regard much more related to the development, the design of narratives in a certain way, similar to the work of a colleague from France, Geoffrey Moulet, and he presented it on last Tuesday, where he also, in fact, Geoffrey, what he developed, he was registering images of the landscape, you know, and also associating the landscape from higher explore to the space capital. In other words, the capital that's aggregated to a housing unit by the landscape that we get. But also mostly and more important because they are related to perceptions of the urban territory, and that's what we try to design and develop by the photography. So the collages, they are much more related. They have a thematic approach, and they are related to liminaries and tensions and conflicts. So when we look at the collage of that overlays, the community, the Islam of Paraisópolis, images of the high middle class, Avenida Giovanni Gronchi, it's not only a way, it's a reading. It's a mapping of the territory, of its conflict, of its tensions, and of its heterogeneity. The same one in Republica, that's important to understand, I think. And the last thing is that Google Street View was, in reality, we didn't, we had no other alternative. We couldn't do field work, we couldn't go to the work, and then we decided to explore. And it was fun, and it was funny, and as Luciano was commenting, it also helped, and it opened other possibilities of exploring the register of the imagery of the urban tissue, right? And it also happened to that. But these are points of inflection of a research. You start, you don't know where you're going to get. If somebody asked me about it in the beginning of the research, I would never say that we would be using Google Street View to try to map the urban environment. But because of the pandemic, we did, and we learned a lot, as Luciano pointed out, and making it clear that there are differences, using the tool and exploring really the city. There is an intermediation, a virtual intermediation in that. That's interesting. There are things that we have to, I think, to reflect about it, to think about it, to mull it over, and trying to systematize our thoughts.
Marcel, we are here. We don't have any questions, specific questions. So I want to know if you want to say anything else, Marcel.
No, that's okay, Camila. I just to speak about the GIS, that how GIS was important and have been important to the project, and how the data about census and other sources that have improved the analysis to support the works and all activity of the project, but just it. And I want to talk about that because all this information now, the census 2020 was blocked by the government, and we have had problems in our country about the data production, and the government have a hide information for the people. It's very dangerous. It's a problem for investigation about scientific research, and the main now about the pandemic, for example, for public policies. And I want to talk about it, how it's difficult in the country, the relationship about the government and the scientific production and the attacks to the university. It's a very hard moment that we are living here, and I want to express my that is very difficultly the situation in our country in that moment. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Marcel. Well, Manoel, you are moved.
Yeah, just to point out two things and to stress two important things that Marcel just mentioned. Again, I don't know how many have the opportunity to follow other sessions, and for us, São Paulo, different from Lyon, it's important for those who didn't attend other sessions. It's important to understand that we never wanted to compare São Paulo and Lyon. That was never the question. We knew since the beginning that these are two incomparable cities. They are completely different. The question was, to what extent a certain logic of production of the city, independently of the single cultural and social singularities, we would be able to find similarities in São Paulo and Lyon. So, in one hand, okay, in Lyon, that's not a vertical city. It's very easy, for instance, to pinpoint 2, 3, 4 buildings that I want to study, that I know why. For us, more than 13,000 high-rise buildings in the period of the study from 85 to 2019 couldn't be like that. So, georeferencing all the databases and associating it by means of territorial units of analysis with social and cultural and economic aspects, as Marcel pointed out, related to basically to the universal index, it was central. It was just central. We needed it. Otherwise, it would be what? Not only arbitrary. There is no adjective to qualify what it would be. It would be whatever. I want this building. I want that. That's what's so important. And the last thing I want to register has nothing to do with the project, but has all to do with future Brazilian research. As Marcel mentioned, the stupidity of the federal government of not providing finance to the new census. That will be a huge problem to public policies in our country, not only for in relation to urbanism and architecture, but to whatever, public health, you name it. And unfortunately, the way to go, it's something that you have to live it. We will have to live with it. Oh, come on. It's amazing. So these are the 2 points I wanted to make. I mean, one is just to contextualize a little the importance of the georeferences system and how the GIS was important to the research as a whole. It's not, okay, let's use GIS. It's a new tool. It's a new, so no. I mean, we needed it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to get where we got. That's just it. And unfortunately, for instance, many of the findings that Loic and Bianca and Hélène, that they, for instance, in terms of vertical segregation, that is a fact in high-rise buildings, independently, at least here in Brazil, and Vinicius is searching that Vinicius map, independently of the profile of the inhabitants, of the level, you have vertical segregation also in Brazilian communities. That was something that I didn't expect in the research, but that's something that became quite clear. Okay, forget. I'm not talking about the panel. I'm talking about the research in China. Sorry.
Okay, now, thank you very much for the presentations and for the discussion. Luciano, you're mute.
I don't know if you finished now, but I'd like to thank our group, Highrise group, and especially to Ricardo Santiago, because he helped very much in conceptions these photographies. Okay, okay, only this. Okay.
Okay, it's a great group. It's a great team. So we wait for you and for the people on YouTube in the next sessions, next meetings. Please visit the site of Highrise Symposium for the programmation on the week. Manoel, you have any? No? Okay.
No, I talked too much already.
One more else, one more.
I mean, in my name, in the name of Christian, I just want to thank you all guys, Marcel, Luciano, Hélène, and Loic, for sharing the knowledge of your work with us today. Thank you very much.
Okay, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Keep safe.
Bye-bye.